When I moved into my daughter's house, I thought I'd finally have family around me again. But one morning, I found my wife's favorite coffee mug, cracked, left on my bed with a note that said, "We need to talk about your stay here." Later that week, I overheard my own son-in-law whisper, "If he doesn't sign those papers soon, we'll force the issue." They didn't know I had already met with an attorney, and the truth they were hiding was far uglier than what they planned for me. And just when they tried to take my house, a man knocked on the door, holding documents that exposed everything they'd done behind my back. If you want to know how a quiet old man turned the tables on his own children, follow my story until the end, and tell me which city you're watching from. The next morning hadn't arrived yet, but the air already carried that familiar chill of late autumn as I walked up to Tynesha's doorstep. A small overnight bag hung from my hand. Just enough clothes for a few days, nothing more. The house sat quietly in the Steel Creek neighborhood, trimmed lawns and soft porch lights glowing across the street. It was the kind of place my wife, Laverne, loved walking through during evening strolls. That memory alone carried enough warmth to push me forward. Staying with family, I hoped, might soften the loneliness that had settled into the house ever since she passed. Inside, the smell of dinner drifted from the kitchen. Happiness didn't quite rise in my chest. Something gentler, more cautious. A man can live 70-odd years and still hope his presence brings comfort instead of burden. That was the hope carried through the doorway when I stepped in. Lamarcus moved around the kitchen with quick, practiced motions. For a moment, watching him slice vegetables reminded me of how Laverne used to prepare meals. Quiet, steady, efficient. Instinctively, I stepped forward to help. My hands reached for a cutting board, the same way they had countless times over the years beside her. Before fingers even brushed the handle, Lamarcus brushed past me sharply, his arm pushing mine aside. "You're blocking the counter, sir." The word "sir" wasn't respectful. It was cold, clipped, as if saying my name tasted sour. I stepped back, more out of surprise than pain. A small silence filled the kitchen, thin, tight, stretching between us. The sting didn't come from his tone alone, but from realizing I wasn't welcome in a room where I'd once been part of the heartbeat of my family. Tanisha entered next, her shoes tapping lightly on the tile. She glanced my way, but didn't meet my eyes. "Daddy, you can sit down. Don't worry about helping." The politeness in her voice felt like a wall, not a bridge. Kind enough to sound proper, cold enough to keep distance. A quiet ache settled somewhere behind the ribs. When your own child sounds as if your presence complicates the room, it carves something sharp inside you. Nothing dramatic, just a small cut you feel every time you breathe. I moved into the living room, lowering myself onto the couch. The house looked different from the last visit. My favorite armchair wasn't there anymore. The family picture on the shelf, everyone smiling in matching sweaters, had no space for me. Even the TV hummed at a volume just low enough that no one bothered to speak over it. They moved around me rather than with me, their conversations weaving above my head like threads from a life I no longer seemed part of. The thought settled heavy. Maybe this is what aging quietly becomes in modern America, fading into the background while life continues without pause. My eyes drifted to the doorway, where shadows of memory often lurked. Laverne's voice whispered back from years earlier. "You always give too much of yourself, Rudy." She said it with a smile, like she admired it, but there had been warning in her tone too. A gentle reminder that generosity doesn't always shield a person from loneliness. Her voice softened the room with a warmth no heater could match. Still, the ache didn't fade. Dinner brought more silence. Plates filled the table, hands passed dishes, but no words came my way. No gentle question about how I'd been holding up. No small laugh thrown toward my end of the table. Just a quiet so thick it pressed on the chest. The clinking of silverware echoed louder than any conversation. It was strange, the way a man could sit among family and feel like he'd slipped into another dimension entirely. One where he was visible, but not seen. Respectable, but not valued. Present, but not wanted. As the meal ended, I rose to carry my plate to the sink. Somewhere behind me, two low voices murmured. The tone caught my ear before the words did. Serious. Final.
"He can't stay like this forever," Lamarcus whispered. Not a suggestion, a warning. My hand froze around the plate. The world narrowed into that single sentence, heavy and deliberate. The words echoed in my chest long after the house grew. The next morning carried a strange heaviness, the kind that settles on your chest before you even swing your feet out of bed. The house felt colder than it had the night before, as if whatever warmth was left in it decided not to return with the sunrise. The memory of Lamarcus's whisper hung in the air. He can't stay like this forever. Those words didn't come from concern. They carried weight, intention. Even before opening the bedroom door, something in me knew the tone of this house had shifted. The hallway was still, no smell of breakfast drifting through like it used to when Laverne moved around our own kitchen back home. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that made you feel like you'd walked into the wrong room by mistake. When I stepped into the kitchen, no one looked up. The sound of the refrigerator humming was louder than my own greeting. I didn't push it. Sometimes silence tells more truth than words, and I'd already gathered plenty from the night before. The counter where I had left Laverne's old mug was empty. That mug had travelled with me through every move, every chapter. Seeing it missing didn't sit right. I asked Tynesha if she'd seen it. She didn't look up from her phone when she answered, "Maybe you misplaced it, Daddy." Her tone was soft around the edges, but it carried a chill. No accusation, just a polite dismissal. But age sharpens memory, especially when it comes to the belongings of someone you loved for 50 years. That mug had been right there, and now it wasn't. Trying to shake it off, I sat at the table. That was when Lamarcus brought up the morning's real topic. He shifted in his chair, clearing his throat the way people do when they're about to say something they've practiced.
"We've been talking," he said, "and with house expenses going up, we figured maybe you could pitch in a little, just until you get more steady, sir." He said it like a suggestion, but the look in his eyes felt more like a calculation. I explained gently that my retirement and the small savings Laverne left me were enough to get by. The moment I mentioned savings, his expression changed just slightly, tightened, like a man spotting a number on a check he wasn't expecting. That look wasn't lost on me. The older you get, the better you read these things, even when people think you're too slow to notice. The rest of the morning tightened around me like a rope. Every glance from Lamarcus carried a question. Every silence from Tynesha felt intentional. I'd lived long enough to know when a room didn't want me in it anymore. It wasn't anger. They weren't brave enough for that. It was something colder. Planning. A call from my granddaughter Simone broke through that tension like a warm hand on the shoulder. Her voice held the familiarity I'd been missing. She asked if I was settling in okay. Just hearing her say Grandpa reminded me that someone in this family still saw me. But the moment I hung up, Lamarcus leaned forward. "Was that about your pension?" he asked. Something inside me pulled tighter, a small knot of suspicion, not born from imagination, but from watching adults forget their upbringing the moment money enters the room. Later, reaching into the fridge for something to eat, I noticed several items labelled in black marker. "Not for guests." I paused, one hand still on the door. "We're trying to organise better," Tynesha said from behind me. The tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't kind either. Just another small line drawn between them and me. So I nodded, stepped back, and gave them their space. Observing costs less energy than arguing, and reveals far more truth. When I finally returned to the guest room, the sight waiting on the bed stopped me cold. Laverne's mug sat in the centre of the blanket, cracked straight down the middle. Next to it was a folded note. My hands felt heavier than usual when I opened it. "We need to talk about your stay here." The words were short, simple, and final in a way that felt almost rehearsed. A storm cloud settling over a quiet house. Evening settled over the house in a way that felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lamps glowed softly in the living room, but the light didn't bring warmth. It only revealed how quiet everything had become. A stillness like that didn't come from peace. It came from people holding back words. Their bedroom door was nearly closed, but a faint strip of yellow light spilled onto the hallway floor. That thin line felt like a boundary I wasn't meant to cross. Yet every instinct told me something important waited behind it. Suspicion from the morning still clung to me, growing thicker as night moved in. Walking down the hallway, the muffled voices turned clearer. I slowed my steps without meaning to. The way a man does when he senses his life is about to shift. Lamarcus's voice carried first, sharp and confident. "He's not as helpless as he acts. He's hiding money." The words hit like a cold blade. A beat later, my daughter answered, quieter, but firm. "If he stayed this long, he needs to contribute." For a moment, the hallway spun slightly. They weren't just frustrated with me. They were discussing a plan, something calculated. Hurt and disbelief rose strong enough to stop my breath. I stepped back slowly, afraid the floorboards would betray me and tell them I'd heard everything. Returning to the guest room felt like walking away from a wound still open. Sitting on the edge of the bed, thoughts wandered places I never wanted them to go. How had things shifted so far that my own child could believe I'd burden her, or worse, deceive her? Aging teaches you many things, but nothing prepares you for disappointment coming from your own blood. Laverne's voice came back to me then, gentle but steady. "Rudy, don't let people mistake your kindness for weakness." She always saw trouble before it reached the door. Maybe she would have seen this coming too. A quiet doubt settled in. Had I missed the signs? A light knock pulled me from those thoughts. Tynesha stood at the door trying to force a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Daddy, tomorrow morning we should have a talk. About your stay here." The way she said it made the words feel rehearsed, polished the way people prepare for uncomfortable moments. Behind her stood Lamarcus, silent, his posture stiff, arms folded like a man ready to enforce a decision, not discuss one. The tension tightened, shifting from simple discomfort into something approaching confrontation. This wasn't an invitation. It was a notice. Keeping my voice calm, I asked, "Have I done something wrong?" The question hung there, honest as the ache in my chest. She didn't answer directly. "We just need clearer boundaries," she said, eyes drifting away. The tone felt less like love and more like someone closing a door gently so it doesn't slam. Her husband stayed behind her, unmoving, making sure I understood the balance of power in that moment. Whatever this meeting was, it wasn't about support. It was about control. They left me alone after that, the door shutting with a softness that felt colder than slamming. The rest of the house carried a strange rhythm. Low voices, quick footsteps, a drawer sliding open, then shut again. It didn't sound like a family settling down for the night. It sounded like people preparing something. A document? A plan? Hard to tell, but I'd been around long enough to know when decisions were being made in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. Late into the night, I stepped into the hallway to stretch my legs. Passing the trash can near the kitchen, something caught my eye. A torn envelope, familiar handwriting curling across the shredded surface. I leaned down, picking up a fragment. Laverne's looping script stared back at me, delicate and unmistakable. For a second, everything inside me went still. Something that belonged to her, maybe something personal, had been opened or tossed aside without a word. Another piece lay beneath it, and another. Whoever had gone through it hadn't bothered to keep it intact. Kneeling there on the cool tile, I brushed off the torn pieces, trying to understand what exactly they had gone through and why. The weight of the day pressed harder than before. There was a story written in those scraps, but I didn't yet know what part of my life they were trying to unfold or erase. Morning settled in with a weight that pressed against the chest. The pieces of Laverne's torn envelope still lingered in memory, each fragment carrying a question I didn't yet know how to ask. Carrying that quiet ache, I walked into the living room where Tynesha and Lamarcus sat waiting. Their posture was too straight, too prepared. Whatever this family meeting was meant to be, it wasn't born out of love or concern. The air held an uncomfortable stillness, the kind that made the walls feel closer than before. Tynesha folded her hands on the coffee table and offered a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Daddy, we just want to talk about how things will work moving forward." The words were gentle, but the tone had edges. Before I could sit, Lamarcus pushed a folder toward me. Inside were printed bills, notes written in red pen, numbers highlighted like a school assignment. He cleared his throat as if announcing something official. They wanted a monthly contribution from me. Not a conversation, an arrangement. I kept quiet, letting their words circle around the room. This wasn't a discussion about household harmony. It was a shift in power. Their eyes tracked me as though waiting for the moment I'd break. Age teaches a man to stay still, listen carefully, and never give emotion to someone ready to use it against him. The meeting wasn't about helping me settle in. It was about finding a way to control what they believed I carried with me. Then the next blow fell. Lamarcus leaned back and said he'd noticed some irregular activity on my late wife's bank card. Hearing Laverne's name used like bait struck hard. He claimed they were concerned about possible confusion or memory lapses. Tynesha chimed in with a soft voice, offering to help manage my finances, so things don't become overwhelming. Their expressions didn't match their words.
Behind the concern sat expectation. Access to something that wasn't theirs. A quiet firmness rose inside.
"I handle my bills myself," I said with a steady tone. "I'm managing fine." Tanisha blinked, almost startled. Maybe they expected fear or guilt. Maybe they thought age had softened my backbone. But calm can be the strongest response when someone waits for you to lose balance. Lamarcus's jaw tightened. "We just want transparency," he said, the word heavy with accusation. The tension curled around us like a storm gathering at the edges of the house. When I declined to share bank statements or give up control of anything tied to Laverne, Tanisha's voice wavered. She said I never trusted them, that I pushed them away. The blame fell on me like a familiar cloak. But the help they were offering didn't feel like open arms. It felt like a door closing behind me, locking quietly. The heartbreak lay not in the words themselves, but in the distance behind them. The daughter I raised stood before me, yet her eyes held calculation I couldn't ignore. Love was present once, steady as a heartbeat. Now it flickered like a candle, nearly out of wax.
The meeting ended without resolution. They stood together, united in purpose, while I remained seated, trying to understand how family could drift so far from the shore they once promised never to leave. As Lamarcus walked away, he paused, just long enough to speak low enough for only me to hear. "We'll have to handle this another way." It wasn't a threat. It was certainty. Those words echoed long after they disappeared down the hallway. A warning wrapped in strategy. And beneath it, a chill settled deeper than the cold morning air, hinting that the next move was already in motion. The dining room still held the stale heaviness from the meeting that morning. The papers Lamarcus pushed toward me had been cleared away, but the weight of his words lingered. The house felt too still, as if every wall had absorbed the tension. A part of me tried to breathe steadily, reminding the spirit that had weathered countless storms that this, too, could be faced. Yet the torn envelope, the folder of bills, the sudden shift in my own daughter's tone, they all clung to the mind like heavy rain clouds. A knock sounded at the front door, sharp and deliberate. Tanisha called out from the kitchen, asking me to get it. The tone was too prepared, too quick, and it set off the suspicion simmering since dawn. Opening the door revealed a man in a neat jacket, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression practiced for persuasion. His introduction sounded harmless enough, but the questions drifted quickly into territory no stranger had business asking. Income sources, benefits, bank accounts, survivors' plans, all presented under the guise of financial wellness outreach. There was no mistake. Someone had sent him. He spoke with gentle insistence, the kind that sounded helpful while stripping away dignity. Glancing toward the kitchen, I caught sight of Tanisha, halfway hidden behind the doorway, listening intently. Every question from the man cut a little deeper, but the voice stayed calm. Eventually, he slipped me a business card, just in case, and walked away. Once he turned the corner of the driveway, the card was quietly torn in half. The front door had barely closed when Lamarcus stepped in through the back, brushing dirt off his hands like he'd been out there all afternoon. His first question, too casual, too quick, told the truth. Did he explain everything clearly? No need to ask which he. The slip was clean, exposing the plan underneath all their careful politeness. When asked why he brought a stranger into my personal business, he put on a tone that pretended concern, talking about protection and responsibility. Every word carried the quiet insult that I wasn't capable of managing my own life. The voice stayed level, but the boundary was firm.
No stranger would be involved in decisions that belonged to me. No finances would be reviewed by anyone in this house. No meeting would be held behind my back again. Tanisha's face hardened at the refusal. She insisted they only wanted transparency, as if simple caution was secrecy. The more they explained, the clearer their intentions became. The house split into two sides, their side filled with whispers and closed doors, and mine, a quiet corner where dignity held its ground. Later, trying to clear the mind, I carried the trash outside. That's when the truth revealed itself. Inside the bin, half buried beneath torn wrappers, lay a printed form. The title alone made the breath catch. Application for Financial Power of Attorney. A thick yellow highlight marks the signature line. They hadn't just planned the conversation. They had prepared paperwork. The morning came far too early, and the weight of everything from the night before stayed heavy in my chest. Sleep had barely touched me. The half-completed power of attorney form I found in the trash still lay on the nightstand, where it had been all night, its edges slightly curled, as if it had soaked up the tension in the air. Just looking at it stirred something tight inside. Fear, maybe, but mixed with a rising steadiness that felt like resolve. The house felt different again, lighter in noise, heavier in intention. From the kitchen I could hear soft clinking, Tanisha moving around, humming faintly, acting as if the previous day had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. Lamarcus's deeper voice drifted in every now and then, cheerful in a way that didn't match anything real. Breakfast waited at the table, but I stayed standing, keeping a little distance between us. Their smiles felt borrowed, rehearsed. Something in their eyes gave away the truth. They were waiting for the right moment to move their plans forward. That realization left a hollow ache deep inside, one I tried to steady with long breaths. Halfway through my lukewarm coffee, Tanisha asked softly, "Daddy, can you sit with us in the living room? We wanted to go over something important for the future." Her tone was polite enough, but the shape of her words pressed on my ribs like a weight. They were ready. In the living room, a thick folder sat on the coffee table. The title printed across the front read, "Emergency Preparedness for Dad's Future." A chill ran along my back. Inside were documents arranged in neat stacks. Medical directives, banking access forms, even changes for retirement beneficiaries. Each page carried my typed name, ready for a signature. For a moment, the room felt too small. I kept my voice calm. "Who put all this together?" Tanisha folded her hands in her lap, barely meeting my eyes. "We thought it would be easier for you, so things don't get confusing." Confusing. That word stung more than they knew. Lamarcus stepped in before she could finish. "You need structure, sir, and someone who can keep things organized. This is for your own good." My jaw tightened, but the rest of me stayed still. I asked again, "Who typed my name onto documents I've never seen?" Neither one answered. The silence was the answer. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I let questions do the lifting. Why are the signature lines highlighted? Why is this already filled out? Who's the beneficiary supposed to be? Tanisha's mouth opened, then closed. Lamarcus shifted his weight as if he was prepared for a different reaction. Anger, maybe.
Instead, what he got was clarity. And clarity has a way of unsettling people who rely on confusion. "We're trying to protect you," he said, louder now, pushing confidence where sincerity should have been. "You're acting paranoid." Before I could answer, the house phone rang from across the room. Tanisha stood and grabbed it quickly. Her shoulders stiffened. Then, almost reluctantly, she turned and handed the phone to me. "For you," she said. A woman's voice came through the receiver. "Mr. Delmore, this is Attorney Rhonda Price. I was contacted regarding updates to your power of attorney documents. I wanted to confirm some financial details with you before finalizing." A cold wave washed over me. There it was, proof they didn't plan to discuss control. They planned to take it. "Thank you," I said quietly, "but there won't be any documents. Please cancel anything you've been asked to prepare." When I hung up, the quiet in the room felt sharp. "No more forms," I said. "No more decisions behind my back. My affairs are mine to manage." Tanisha's face crumpled, tears forming too fast, as if she had practiced the reaction. "You don't trust us anymore," she whispered. It wasn't a question. LaMarcus pushed through the back door without looking at me, footsteps heavy and irritated. The slam rattled a few picture frames on the wall. I stood there for a moment, letting the chaos settle. Betrayal from strangers is one thing. Betrayal from your own blood feels like a bruise that keeps deepening, no matter how carefully you breathe. I returned to my room and locked the door. It was the first time I'd ever done that in my daughter's house. The lock clicked softly, but it sounded like something much louder. A boundary they hadn't expected. From the drawer, I pulled out my wife Laverne's old purse. The one thing I'd carried from home that still felt like safety. Inside, wrapped in a faded napkin, lay her old bank card. The same card that sparked their sudden interest in my finances. It was still here, untouched. Their plan hadn't reached everything. Not yet. Later, when I stepped out for a glass of water, LaMarcus's voice drifted in from the hallway. Low, urgent. "If he doesn't sign soon, we'll have to force the issue." My heart slowed. Not from fear, something steadier than that. It was time to pay closer attention. Much closer. The words I'd overheard, "force the issue," lingered in the air as I stepped into the hallway. Every sound in that house seemed amplified, from the hum of the refrigerator to the soft creak of the floorboards. The place no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place where I needed to stay alert. The way LaMarcus had whispered into that phone told me enough. Whatever they were planning, they weren't going to wait much longer. I walked toward my room, keeping my steps slow, steady. The hall was quiet, the mid-afternoon sun slipping through the blinds in thin, harsh lines. Something in the air had shifted, as if the walls themselves had pulled closer. When I reached the door, a chill ran down my spine. It was slightly open, just enough to let me know someone had gone inside. The moment I stepped in, the unease hardened. My suitcase had been moved. Drawers were cracked open. Papers that had been neatly stacked were shifted, bent, disturbed. I reached for the folder where I kept old medical letters and insurance records. They'd been sifted through, not stolen, just inspected. Violated. As if my privacy had become optional the moment I crossed their threshold. A slow burn rose in my chest. I'd survived many things in my lifetime, but having my dignity chipped away piece by my own family, brought a sharper kind of pain. I found Tynesha in the kitchen, wiping the counter, her shoulders stiffening the moment she saw me. "Did you go into my room?" My voice stayed even, not accusing, just seeking truth. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she pressed her lips together and said, "We were just checking if you needed anything, Daddy." A simple sentence, but her tone carried the truth she wouldn't say. Age doesn't dull your instincts. It sharpens the ones that matter. And right now, hers spoke of guilt. I looked at her a moment longer. Even Simone's warm voice from the other morning felt distant now that my own child was lying straight to my face. There's a hurt that only family can cause, the kind that sits deep, pushing roots where you don't want them to grow. Coming back to the living room, I found Lamarcus holding a stack of mail, already opened. He didn't bother pretending. He handed it to me with a smirk I'd learned to recognize over the past few days. "We're helping manage your correspondence," he said, like it was a courtesy. One envelope was from my bank, split wide open, its contents exposed. The violation hit sharper than the rest. They were no longer hinting at control. They were building a path straight to it. I kept my expression calm. Anger wouldn't do me any favors. Not now. Not with the way they'd started twisting every reaction I gave. So I stepped outside, telling them I needed some air. The moment the door shut behind me, my heart beat with a clearer purpose. I pulled out my phone, turned my back to the house, and began taking pictures. My disturbed room, the opened mail, the pre-filled documents from the morning. Quiet evidence, proof that I wasn't imagining any of this. It felt strange, documenting betrayal in a place where I once hoped to find comfort. But survival sometimes comes dressed in unexpected forms. This was one of them. Back inside, on my way down the hall, I heard Tynesha speaking softly on the phone. "Grandpa's confused. He's not himself lately. Don't worry about visiting." Her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with strategy. They weren't just taking control of my finances. They were trying to cut off my support. Simone's presence had always been a shield, a reminder of love in a house that was losing it. And now they were rewriting my identity to push her away. A deep ache settled in my chest. Not anger this time. Something heavier, the realization that my daughter, my own flesh and blood, would betray me as someone incapable just to make their path easier. Evening crept in before I realized how long I'd been standing in the hallway. The house sat in a strange, unnatural quiet, like everyone inside was waiting for something to fall apart. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Dalmore, I think you should know what they requested. Call me." Attorney Rhonda Price. The moment I saw her name, my heart tightened. Whatever this was, it wasn't just family tension anymore. It was becoming a legal battle, and they had already taken their first steps. The unknown number kept flashing on my phone, the vibration rattling against my palm like a warning I hadn't asked for. Stepping out onto the porch, I shut the door quietly behind me. The evening air cut sharp against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold inside that house. A voice answered almost immediately. "Mr. Dalmore, we need to talk. Now." Attorney Rhonda Price. The urgency in her tone sent a tightness through my chest. Keeping my eyes on the windows so Lamarcus and Tynesha wouldn't see me, I walked down to the bottom step. The yard lights flickered on as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. "What's going on?" The words came out low, steady, though everything in me felt anything but calm. "You need to hear this," she said, breath quickened. "Your daughter and son-in-law contacted my office earlier this week. They requested full power of attorney, financial, medical, property, everything." A slow, dull throb formed behind my eyes. "And what reason did they give?" She hesitated. "They claimed you were declining in mental clarity, that you might be unsafe managing your own affairs." The words hit with the force of a punch. For a moment, the world softened around the edges. The porch step beneath me felt unsteady. To think my own family, my blood, would twist my dignity into a weapon. There was no betrayal sharper. I sank onto the next step, elbows braced on my knees. The phone shook in my hand until I closed my fist around it. "They planned this," I murmured. "They've been planning this." "Yes," she answered quietly, "and I need you to listen carefully. They didn't submit the final paperwork because I refused to move forward with it. Something felt wrong." That pulled my attention back. "Why?" I asked. "I looked into them," she said, "into Lamarcus specifically." The wind picked up, rustling the dried leaves near my feet. My pulse hammered loud in my ears. She continued, voice steady and clinical. "He has significant debt, credit card delinquencies, and 2 wage garnishment attempts filed within the past year." I exhaled sharply, stunned but not surprised. Something in that man always felt like he was balancing on a financial cliff. "There's more," she added. "I also found signs he may be under pressure from someone he owes money to, a third party. That may explain why he's trying to access your assets." The scope of it widened in an instant. This wasn't just family greed. It was desperation. Maybe even fear. And they wanted to use me to climb out of whatever hole he'd dug. My hands slowly steadied. My breathing found a rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, the shock folded itself into something firmer, a quiet, rising resolve. "What do I do next?" I asked. "Do not sign anything," she said firmly. "Not a document, not a receipt, not a package. Nothing. They might try to trick you." A pause followed. "I want to meet you privately tomorrow morning, away from the house." "Where?" "I'll text the address. And Mr. Delmore?" "Come alone." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "You have my word." "And one more thing," she said. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Parents deserve better." Her voice softened the hurt just enough to breathe. After we hung up, I stayed on that porch for a long moment, letting the night settle around me. Inside, the house lights glowed through the windows. The place where I'd once hoped to find warmth now felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. I tucked my phone away, smoothed out the expression on my face, and walked back inside. They were both in the living room, too quiet, too alert. Their eyes tracked me like they were checking for cracks in my composure. So I gave them none. Years of living, loving, and surviving had taught me how to hold my storms behind still eyes. On my way down the hallway, Lamarcus stepped into my path, pressing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad," he said, gripping my shoulder a little too long. "Tomorrow morning, we need you to come with us, just to sign a couple of forms." Forms. Always forms. His hand tightened. I nodded slowly, the calm in my voice masking everything boiling beneath it. "We'll see." Inside my head, The words were different. Tomorrow, everything changes. The night had left more weight on my shoulders than rest in my bones. Every hour had been a slow wrestle between fear and resolve, the kind of battle a man fights alone in the dark. By sunrise, exhaustion clung to every muscle, but my mind stayed sharp. There was no room for weakness now. Before stepping out of the guest room, I steadied my breathing and reminded myself that dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to keep walking. As I headed toward the front door, I caught both of them watching me. Their silence carried a question they didn't dare ask. I let the door close behind me without offering a single word. South Tryon Street greeted the morning with cold air and a sky still deciding between grey and blue. Rhonda's office sat in a modest brick building between a dental clinic and a tax service. Nothing fancy, just solid, dependable, like the kind of place where truth might finally have a home. Inside, soft light touched the waiting room chairs, and the faint scent of lemon polish carried the feeling of order, of someone who cared about the details. She stood from her desk when I arrived, her expression gentle but purposeful, and gestured for me to sit. A thin manila file lay on the table between us, and the sight of it tightened something in my chest. When she slid the file toward me, her voice stayed steady. Inside were copies of forms bearing my name, forms I had never seen, statements claiming that I was unable to manage daily responsibilities, typed narratives describing forgetfulness, confusion, an inability to pay bills. Lies, all of them. Then came the financial summary. Repeated withdrawals from the Marcus's account, all traced to the same collector, with a history of aggressive tactics. Each page felt like a strike to the ribs, proof that their intentions weren't a moment of panic or misunderstanding. This had been building, planned, rehearsed, executed quietly under my own roof. A father expects love from his child, but expecting loyalty? That's something life teaches you to stop counting on. I leaned back, unable to speak for a moment. It felt like a crack inside me widened, one I didn't know how to close. When I finally found my voice, it carried years of swallowed disappointment. I told Rhonda everything I'd been holding in. The whispers behind the closed door, the opened mail, the missing mug, the way my daughter's eyes had begun avoiding mine like I was a stranger at her table. And then the truth I hadn't wanted to say out loud slipped free. Silence doesn't raise children. It only lets them grow without guidance, sometimes into the very people you prayed they'd never become. Rhonda didn't interrupt. She just listened, steady as stone, giving space for a man to reclaim the dignity he'd nearly lost. Then she opened another folder and laid out her plan. A revocation of all access they might attempt. A temporary protection order to keep them from forcing signatures or claiming incompetence. And then, the real blow. She had already filed a preliminary request last night, after our call. They were legally blocked and didn't even know it yet. Relief washed over me like warm water, unexpected and humbling. For the first time in days, I felt something close to hope. Not victory, not yet, but balance returning to my side of the scale. But protection wasn't the end of it. Rhonda warned that what happened next had to be my choice. I could confront them openly, let the truth strike hard and fast. Or I could move quietly, letting their own actions expose them fully. I took a long breath before answering. A storm shouted in my chest, but my voice came out calm. I would face them, but on my own terms. I would let them think they still held control. just long enough to show the world exactly what they were doing. Rhonda nodded slowly, approving the strategy with a seriousness that made clear the stakes were higher than pride. When I stepped back outside, sunlight had broken through the clouds, laying a thin gold line along the tops of passing cars. A vibration in my pocket pulled me back to the moment. A text from the Marcus lit my screen. "Dad, we need to go over those papers today. Don't be late." For a second, anger threatened to flare, but then something else settled over me. Clarity. They still believed I was walking blind into their plans. They had no idea the ground had already shifted beneath their feet. Staring at the sky, I let out a slow breath and whispered words meant only for myself. A promise carved from the deepest place in my chest. They truly had no idea what waited for them now. The walk up the driveway felt longer than it ever had. My legs stayed steady, but something in my chest pulled tight with every step. The Marcus's text still burned on my phone. He wanted a meeting, not a conversation. A meeting, the kind of word people use when they're about to take something from you. The quiet of the neighborhood didn't comfort me. Even the birds sounded muted. That house, my daughter's house, no longer felt like a place where I could breathe freely. Inside, the air hung heavy. The living room was too neat, as if staged for a performance. Tynesha was arranging papers on the coffee table with a nervous precision, her fingers tapping the edges until they lined up perfectly. Lamarcus paced behind her like a man rehearsing lines he was scared he might forget. They both looked up at me with jittery smiles that didn't belong to family. "There you are, Dad," Tynesha said, voice soft, too soft. "We've been waiting. We want what's best for you." What's best for me? A sentence people use right before they draw a line across a man's life. I lowered myself onto the couch, saying nothing. Watching, listening. They thought silence meant surrender. They forgot silence can be strategy. The papers came sliding across the table as if pushed by a dealer at a card game. Power of attorney, home title transfer, emergency agreements. Every one of them a weapon dressed as kindness. I lifted the first page slowly, pretending to read it for the first time. The words blurred, not because of my age, but because I already knew every trick printed on those lines. Tynesha leaned closer. "Daddy, this is important. We need to know you're taken care of. We don't want things to get harder." There it was, the guilt. She reached for my arm gently, as if affection could soften the trap. Lamarcus stepped in with his own push. "You can't keep living alone. And we can't keep carrying everything. You need to sign these." His voice cracked at the end, impatience bleeding through the act. I looked at them both. My daughter's eyes carried something I didn't want to recognize. Fear, desperation, or the belief that I owed her something I never took. Behind that stood Lamarcus, jaw tight, knee bouncing, sweat gathering at his temple. I placed the papers back on the table carefully, like they were fragile glass. "You two seem awfully eager," I said quietly. Too eager. That was all it took for their polished performance to start slipping. Tynesha's smile twitched. "Daddy, please don't make this difficult." And then it came, the moment everything cracked open. They began arguing with each other. Tynesha whispering too harshly, Lamarcus snapping back. Then, in a burst of frustration, he spat out the truth neither meant to say aloud. "If we don't get this house locked in, they will come after me next week." Time froze. Tynesha's eyes widened in horror. Lamarcus realized what he'd said too late. And I just sat there, letting the quiet drag their confession into the light. I lifted my head slowly. "Who's coming after you, son?" He looked away.
Tanisha grabbed his arm, shaking her head, trying to shut him up. But the damage was done. The motive laid out bare. Debt, threats, a noose tightening around their lives, and they wanted to tie it to my property, my dignity. "I know about the calls," I continued calmly. "The forms, the meetings you tried to arrange behind my back." Their breath stilled. "And I know what you tried to file last week." Fear hit first, genuine and raw. Then anger rushed in behind it, taking over. Tanisha's voice sharpened. "So now you're spying on us, after everything we've tried to do for you?" Lamarcus stepped closer, heat in his eyes. "You should be grateful we're trying to help." Grateful. That word pierced deeper than any attack could. I leaned back, letting their anger crash like a wave while mine stayed controlled, steady. Help doesn't come with forged documents. Help doesn't come with lies. And help doesn't come with you trying to take the only thing your mother and I built together. The room went still. They were no longer talking to a confused old man they thought they could corner. They were talking to someone who saw every move they made. Their faces drained of colour when I stood up. "If you want this house," I said quietly, "you'll have to fight the law, not me." For a moment, nobody breathed. Even the air felt stunned. Then it came, a sharp, loud knock at the front door. All three of us froze. Tanisha looked at Lamarcus. Lamarcus looked at me. And somewhere deep inside, something told me exactly who it might be. Walking toward the door, a strange heaviness pressed across my chest, like the air inside the house had thickened. Every step carried the echo of what had just unfolded in the living room. Behind me, I could hear Lamarcus whispering harshly to Tanisha, panic tangled in every breath they exchanged. Their voices tangled in fear, but I didn't turn back. Whatever waited on the other side of that door felt inevitable now. Something that had been waiting to confront us long before today. The closer I got, the clearer the world became. The faint hum of cars on the street, a dog barking 2 houses down, the soft tick of the hallway clock. Strange how ordinary sounds could exist in the middle of a storm. My hand reached for the knob, steady even though everything inside felt like shifting ground. When I opened the door, a man in a business jacket stood neatly on the porch. Not angry, not loud, just firm. He glanced at the clipboard in his hands, then at me. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm here to speak with Lamarcus Delmore. Is he inside?" The way he said my son's name, flat, professional, made something sink inside my stomach. I stepped aside, not inviting him in, but not blocking him either. "Yes, he's here," I answered slowly. "What's this concerning?" He tapped the corner of the clipboard. "Outstanding debt obligations, sir, and collateral concerns tied to a property address connected to the name he provided." He paused, glancing down at the file. "This address." The words hit harder than I expected. Even knowing the truth, even suspecting it, hearing it confirmed stung like betrayal layered over betrayal. I turned slightly. "He'd better come in." The man stepped inside with a respectful nod. Behind me, the shift in the room was immediate.
Tanisha stiffened where she stood near the hallway, and Lamarcus froze mid-step like his soul had been yanked straight out of him. The representative glanced between them. "Are you Lamarcus Delmore?" My son swallowed hard. "Yeah," he murmured. The man began placing documents on the coffee table, the same table where they had tried to force signatures from me earlier. "These are overdue statements, including 2 notices you ignored and 1 that was returned."
And here, he tapped another set of forms, "is documentation showing you attempted to present intent to use this home as collateral." Tanisha's hand flew to her mouth. "Lamarcus, tell him that's not true." But Lamarcus didn't speak, not a word. He stared at the papers like they were burning through the wood. The representative sighed gently, not cruel, not mocking, just factual. "If this isn't resolved within 14 days, the case automatically escalates to the State Fraud Division." The room fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. 14 days. Fraud Division. Consequences no amount of sweet talk or manipulation could bend. My son's shoulders collapsed. A sound escaped him, half sigh, half surrender. I didn't think it'd go this far," he whispered. "I was trying to buy time." My heart twisted. "Buy time for what, son?" He didn't answer, but the desperation in his eyes was enough. Debt. Threats. A mess bigger than he ever admitted. I stepped closer. Not angry, just tired. "Son," I said softly, "I can forgive mistakes, but I can't protect you from choices." His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear, not of me, but of himself. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he muttered. "You already did." My voice cracked a little, but I didn't raise it. "You crossed into parts of my life you had no right to enter." Tanisha wiped her eyes, voice shaking. "You're abandoning us? After everything?" "Abandoning you?" I shook my head. "I've been here. I stayed, even when it hurt. But helping isn't the same as handing over my life for you to control." She turned away, angry tears falling. Lamarcus stared at the floor. The representative gathered his papers. "I'll leave you all to discuss next steps, but the clock starts today. I suggest speaking with legal counsel." He gave me a respectful nod on his way out. When the door closed behind him, the silence in the house was suffocating. Lamarcus mumbled something about needing air and walked out without meeting my eyes. Tanisha followed him to the driveway, slamming the car door hard enough to make the windows tremble. The house fell still. For the first time in days, no footsteps circled me. No whispers trailed behind my back. Just quiet. Heavy, aching quiet. I lowered myself into the nearest chair, letting the weight of everything settle around me. Years of memories drifted through my mind. Birthdays, school events, long nights spent working overtime so my kids could dream big. And now here I was, a father wondering when the love he gave turned into something they believed they could take. As the sun began to set behind the trees, my phone vibrated on the table. A single message from an unknown number lit the screen. "Mr. Delmore, I think you should know what your son told us last week." My breath caught. And just like that, the truth opened a new wound. The message glowed on my phone so long the screen dimmed twice before any part of me moved. Outside, Steel Creek was sliding into evening. Inside, the house was still and tight, like it was holding its breath with me. At last, I tapped the unknown number and brought the phone to my ear.
A woman answered on the second ring, calm and clear. "This is Denise Carter." "Ma'am," I said, steady as I could. "This is Rudolph Delmore. You texted me." There was a small pause, the kind people take when they're about to change your day. "Yes, sir. I'm a social worker with a financial counseling program here in Mecklenburg County. Your son, Lamarcus, has been meeting with us. I think you ought to know what he's been saying." The air in my chest cooled. "Go on." "He told us you were declining," she said gently. "That you left the stove on, forgot to pay bills, misplaced money. He said you needed him to control your assets for your safety." The words were familiar. I'd heard their cousins in this house for days. Hearing them in her careful voice, written down somewhere with my name on top, cut deeper than any sharp tone at the dinner table. "There's also a record," she added, "of him starting a preliminary competency concern in your name, then withdrawing it. That's why I reached out. Something felt wrong." "Do you have that in writing?" I asked. "Yes. I can email everything directly to you." While she stayed on the line, the file arrived. I opened it and watched the pieces of the last weeks arrange themselves on the screen. Notes calling me confused. Draft power of attorney forms naming my son as agent. A mention of liquidating current residents. And a short statement from Tynesha backing his story. "I'm sorry, Mr. Delmore," Denise said softly. A long, quiet ache spread across my chest. "Don't be. He did right." When the call ended, the living room felt too small to hold all that truth. There comes a point in a man's life when he has to decide who gets to tell his story. Standing there, phone still warm in my hand, I knew this was that point. Before the sky went dark, I drove to the small police substation off South Tryon. The officer at the front desk listened as I laid everything out. The opened mail, the staged concern, the so-called counsellor. Now, this file. He took notes, asked a few careful questions, then nodded. "You're doing the right thing, sir," he said. "We'll file a report and flag your name. Nobody gets to move on your property or accounts without alarms going off." He connected me to an elder law attorney. After hearing the short version, the man on the line said, "Mr. Delmore, what you did today may have just saved your home and your independence. We'll reinforce whatever attorney Price has already put in place." Driving back through Steel Creek, porch lights blooming along the street, kids still chasing a basketball in the chill air. The world looked the same. But it wasn't the same man driving that car. Fear had shifted into something firmer. When I stepped back into the house, the smell of takeout food hung in the air. Lamarcus and Tynesha were at the dining table, papers spread out like a second meal. "Where you been?" Tynesha snapped. "We needed to go over things." "Out taking care of my business," I said, hanging my jacket with deliberate calm. Lamarcus tried for patience and missed. "Dad, you keep making this harder. We're trying to help you." I took the chair at the head of the table, the place I hadn't sat since I first arrived. My phone and the thin stack of printed pages went down in front of me. "Son," I said, meeting his eyes, "the state knows everything now, and so do I." For a moment, all I heard was the ceiling fan whirring. Then Tynesha's voice broke the silence. "What are you talking about?" I slid the pages toward them. "Read." They bent over the first sheet. I watched color drain from their faces as they saw their own words staring back. Notes from the counseling program, references to me being unstable, plans to manage my accounts, talk of this house like it was already theirs. This was confidential, Tanisha whispered. No, I answered. This is about me. You turned my life into paperwork. Paperwork has a way of finding daylight. Lamarcus's shoulders sagged. Whatever anger he'd been holding on to slipped, leaving something raw behind. I was drowning, he said, voice rough. You don't know what it's like to have people calling day and night, threatening your job, your credit, everything. The house was the only thing with enough value to shut them up. You're right, I said quietly. I don't know those exact calls, but I do know what it's like to work double shifts so there'd be food on this table. To miss birthdays I still regret, because the light bill didn't care how old you were turning. He rubbed his forehead. I thought if I could just get a little control, just for a while, I could fix it before you ever knew. You don't fix a hole in your own boat by drilling one in somebody else's, I replied. You don't save your future by stealing another man's present. Tanisha crossed her arms tight. So after all those years you were gone working, now you get to sit there and judge us. The old guilt knocked, but it didn't get in. I made mistakes, I said. I stayed at that factory when I should have been sitting at your school plays. I can't change that. But I never tried to take away your right to live your own life. I never told a stranger you were too broken to trust with your own bank account. Silence settled heavy over the table. I filed protections today, I went on. From here on out, any move you make toward my accounts or this house will ring bells in more than one office. I won't be signing anything. I won't be handing over keys you didn't earn. You're choosing them over us, she shot back, eyes bright with hurt and pride tangled together. I'm choosing boundaries, I said. That's part of love too. Boundaries say, this is where I end and you begin. Without that line, nobody's safe. Lamarcus looked at the papers again, then at me. What do you want me to do? Get help, I answered. Real help. Sit with those counselors and tell the truth this time. Talk to a lawyer who isn't trying to use my name. Face whatever's coming without trying to stand behind your father like a shield. And until you do, you don't come back here asking for anything that isn't yours. There was no fight left in him. He nodded once, eyes wet, and pushed back from the table. Tanisha hovered a second longer, torn between apology and anger, then followed him out. The front door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. I stayed at the table until the quiet stopped feeling like a stranger. The pictures on the wall, the hum of the fridge, even the dent in the old baseboard by the hallway, signs of years and lives, felt like they were watching with me. At last I made my way to the small den in the back. Laverne's rocking chair waited by the window, same soft cushion, same worn arms. Lowering myself into it, I let the wood's gentle creak and the distant sound of a barking dog settle around me. I kept our home safe, love, I whispered toward the dark glass. Just like we promised each other. The peace that came wasn't fireworks. It was a steady warmth in the middle of the chest. The kind a man earns when he finally stands up straight after bending too long. Sitting there,
it struck me that this story wasn't just mine. There are a lot of folks my age sitting in quiet rooms across this country, wondering if they're being too suspicious or not suspicious enough. Wondering if loving their children means saying yes to anything that's put in front of them. Getting older doesn't mean giving up your rights. A grey head does not equal a blank mind. Protect what you built. Put your name on your papers. Ask questions when something feels off. Say no when help starts to sound like control. Love your family, yes, but love yourself enough to draw a clear line when that love is being used as leverage. By the time the neighborhood lights dimmed and the street outside settled into its own sleep, one truth sat still and solid inside me. A father's last gift isn't always money or houses. Sometimes it's the example he leaves behind of how to stand up, even when standing hurts. For the first time in a long while, looking at my reflection in the dark window, it felt like I had finally done right by the man staring back.